Please be seated so that we may bring in the current members of the Ontario Squash Hall of Fame. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. If you'd like to take your seats. My name is Anne Smith, and as chair of the Ontario Squash Hall of Fame Board of Governors, I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Packed in are most of the members of the Hall of Fame, or those representing members who are sadly no longer with us. We're very pleased to welcome you here tonight. I will call out their names by the class, the year of the class that they were inducted, and they will go to their seats. I have to get a new page for this because I would probably forget quite a few of the names. The class of 2005, Sharif Khan, Martin Mason, representing Jim Mason, Stewart, representing Ian Stewart, Susan Swift, unable to attend was Jack Fairs. If they could go to their seats. I'll do the class of 2007. Ernest Howard, Jerry Sugar, myself, Anne Smith, Heather Wallace, and unable to attend, Jonathan Power. The class of 2007 can go to their seats. The class of 2009, Barney Lawrence, who is unfortunately no longer with us, Audrey Leggett, representing Donald Leggett, and Tony Swift. Class of 2011, Frank Bailey and Gary Waite. Class of 2013, Gordon Anderson, Peter Hall, unable to attend, Graham Riding. Lily Gillespie, sorry, class of 2015, Lily Gillespie, representing Jay Gillespie. Melanie Jans, Cindy Saxby, representing Mark Saxby, and unable to attend, Barbara Cooper. Class of 2017, Rob Brooks, Victor Harding, and Jim Kendall. great pleasure, I will now introduce you to the class of 2019, Clive Caldwell, Peter Frost, and Vinnie Taylor. Created by Squash Ontario in 2005, with an induction ceremony once every 2 years. The Hall of Fame is managed by an independent board of governors who are responsible for the selection of individuals nominated for membership to the Hall of Fame. We had a number of nominations this year, and the board did an excellent job with the selection process. I would like to recognise the board members, if they will stand when I call their names. Rob Brooks, Sherry Funston, Penny Glover, Peter Hall, and Tony Swift. Peter's here. The board work very hard and have done a great job getting this event organised. Peter Hall also has done an outstanding job fundraising and expanding memorabilia in the actual Hall of Fame based in White Oaks. Thank you all for the work you do for the Hall of Fame. We couldn't manage without Squash Ontario's administrative assistance, big long word. Many thanks to President Bruce Marrison, Jamie Nichols, Lauren Saxby, and Lindsay Yates, Communications Director, who helped a lot with this event. And in fact, she was instrumental in getting together the slideshow that you've been seeing this evening. So thank you. I'd like to acknowledge Lolly Gillen, who is representing Squash Canada. Squash Canada was enormously helpful in promoting the event. I'd also like to thank John LaHoop, President of the Canadian Jesters, and Bert Keane, President of the Ontario Jesters, for their help also in promoting the event. As most of you know, the actual Hall of Fame is located at White Oaks Resort and Spa, Niagara-on-the-Lake. The Wakehill family, who own the resort, are extremely supportive of the Hall of Fame being located at the resort. There were a number of things we wanted to pursue to promote awareness of the Hall of Fame, which they fully embraced. To do so, we needed financial support. As you will see from the programme, we have a number of friends of squash. A sincere thank you to those of you in the squash community who have financially supported the Hall of Fame. This year, those contributions have allowed us to establish 4 regional road directional signs in the Niagara region, provide a new "You've Arrived" signage at White Oaks, and with thanks to Al Hunt and Peter Hall, enabled expansion of the pictorial history of the Hall of Fame for both the Ontario Squash Hall of Fame website as well as the Screenscape slideshow playing at the home of the Hall of Fame at the club at White Oaks, Niagara-on-the-Lake. Now, it's time to get on with dinner and what we've all been eagerly waiting for, the induction ceremony for the class of 2019. Our Master of Ceremonies for the first 6 induction ceremonies was Paul Wilson, whom I'd like to acknowledge for his service. Last year, Paul could not attend at short notice, and Peter Hall came back from Florida to be the MC. He did a great job, and I'm delighted he agreed to be MC again this year. Peter is well known in the squash community, a member of the Hall of Fame, on the Board of Governors. Welcome, Peter, and to all of you, enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to the Ontario Squash Hall of Fame induction ceremony for the class of 2019. You've already seen Peter Frost, Vinnie Taylor, and Clive Caldwell. My name is Peter Hall, and it's my privilege and pleasure to host this, the 8th biennial induction ceremony. Currently, we boast 25, soon to be 28 members, starting with the class of 2005. Sadly, 6 of the members are no longer with us, namely Jay Gillespie, Barney Lawrence, Don Leggett, Jim Mason, Mark Satchby, and Ian Stewart. The Ontario Squash Hall of Fame was created by Squash Ontario to promote a greater awareness of the history of the game and squash in Ontario by recognizing individuals for their outstanding achievements and exceptional contributions to the game and to preserve the heritage of the game. 2009 marked the opening of the permanent home of the Ontario Squash Hall of Fame at White Oaks Resort and Spa in Niagara-on-the-Lake, thanks to the generosity of the Wakil family. I encourage you to visit the hall on your next visit to the Niagara region. Also, I invite you to look at our website to view some of the newly created photo galleries that we have for 12 Hall of Fame members. And it's my hope and our hope that we can complete photo galleries for 16 other members in the next year. Come on. How's the paper? Special thanks to Lindsay Yates and Al Hunt for their dedicated efforts in creating these photo galleries. It's great fun putting them together and going through history and trying to date the pictures, who's in it with you, what club was it at, what city, and not everybody's been forthcoming, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Our 3 inductions will take place after the salad course, after dinner, and after coffee. Enjoy. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to introduce our first inductee from the class of 2019, Mr. Peter Frost. Peter was elected as a director of Squash Ontario in 1977 and served for 5 years, serving as president in 1981. In 1983, Peter was elected as a director of the CSRA, now Squash Canada, and served on the board for 6 years, including filling the role of president for 2 years. In addition, Peter was ranking advisory chair, chair of international relations for the International Squash Rackets Federation from '87 to '89, and was the CSRA rep at the ISRF conferences in Brisbane and London. Peter was appointed liaison officer with U.S. Squash for the Lattman Grant matches and became Squash Canada's liaison with U.S. Squash from 1990 to 2005, a period of 15 years. Peter chaired the Ontario singles and Canadian doubles during the 70s and the Canadian singles in '83 and '84 at the Toronto Squash Club. Peter was elected a jester in 1983 and was instrumental in negotiating with Squash Canada for the Canadian jesters to take responsibility for the Lattman Grant matches. Peter coached for over 25 years at Upper Canada College, with his team winning numerous championships, including the past 4 years when they won the independent school varsity titles. As a player, Peter played in 20 Lattman and Grant matches, was captain in 1980 and 1986. He was ranked number 2 in Ontario doubles in 1979 and ranked number 1 in 35-plus singles in Canada in 1980 and won 4 Canadian mixed doubles titles. Peter has received many awards from the squash community, but being inducted into the Canadian Squash Wall of Fame in 1991 and the Toronto Granite Club Sports Hall of Fame in '95 need to be highlighted. Please join me in welcoming somebody who has dedicated much of his life to the game, better known as Frosty, Peter Frost.
Well, that's quite an introduction. Thank you very much, Peter. I really do appreciate those words. And as Peter kind of pointed out, he's stolen everything I was going to say, but I'm very happy for that. But I would like to most sincerely thank the board of the Ontario Squash Hall of Fame for selecting me to enter the hall this year, together with my 2 very good friends, Clive Caldwell and Vincent Taylor. It's an honor that I truly and humbly accept. I would also like to thank my good friend Ray Godbold, who's sitting in the audience here, because he put my name forward, and without him doing that, nothing of this would have happened. Now, you know, I was somewhat taken aback when I started to look back at my career in squash to realize that it began 63 years ago, when I inherited a couple of squash rackets that had been used by my Uncle Gordon back when he was a student at Victoria College. That is indeed a long time ago, so I will apologize in advance if my recollection of events is a bit hazy when it comes to certain of those events and individuals. As Peter Hall so kindly pointed out, my involvement with squash covers a number of areas. I was a player, I was an administrator, and I've been a coach. And I've also been very involved, as Peter mentioned, over the years in both the Jesters Club and the Lapham and Grant Trophy matches. I would just like to touch on a few of the various events or circumstances that I particularly remember. As a player, I won a few of the various events, but I lost a lot more. And as I look around the room today, all I can think of is I've been beaten by almost everybody who plays squash in this room. But two events in my playing career really do stand out in my mind. And the first was playing in the Lapham Grant match in Hamilton around 1995, when my brother Paul and my son Robert and I all played for the Canadian team. It was the only time that we were able to do that, but I really remember that with great fondness. The second special occasion was when I was in Montreal playing in the Smitty one year, and that was a long time ago too. My son Robert and I won the hotly contested Family Feud tournament over my very good friend Richie Bell and his son Brian. Oh, and there is one more. A few years ago, my brother and I teamed up to play in the Canadian doubles tournament here in Toronto, and that would have been the first time in over 25 years that we had done that. And I must say it was an extremely very special event for both of us, because Paul was killed in an accident not long after that. I enjoyed my years on the board of Squash Ontario, but I want to take this opportunity to state that without reservation, that without the help and direction of Sherry Funston and Jan Atkinson, who's now Jan Hall, I would have sunk without a trace. They're remarkable people. And it's important to remember that for those of us who were the elected officials, it was often the people behind the scenes who made so much of a difference to the game that we love. There's no doubt that the single most important policy we brought forward was that of requiring junior players to wear protective eye guards in any Squash Ontario sanctioned event. The policy was adopted as well during my time at Squash Canada and is now virtually universal across Canada and the United States. We also had the eye guard requirement embedded in the official rules of double squash, policies that have no doubt saved the vision of many players. And I remember talking with Heather Mackay one day, and she told me, she said, Peter, you know, I would never go on a doubles court without wearing protective glasses, and I don't understand why anyone would. She said, furthermore, I would never go on a court teaching anyone without wearing protective glasses, because you never know what can happen on a court. And I ended up being hit in the eye, and this protective glasses that I was wearing at the time saved my eyesight. When I think of my time at Squash Canada, I have to say that the help and guidance of the executive directors that I worked with, including Jim Ball, Alan Smith, and technical director Alan Baird, played the same role for me as did Sherry and Jan, and we kept the CSRA board and me on track. I believe one of my major achievements while at Squash Canada was to help transition the responsibility of managing the Lapham Grant matches from Squash Canada to the Jesters Club. Squash Canada at that time was focused on the growth of softball squash, and rightly so. But I feared that the Lapham Grant matches might slide under the radar and be lost. With the help of Linda McPhail, who was the executive director of Squash Canada at the time, Tom Netterpal, who at the time was chair of the Ontario Jesters, an agreement was reached, and the tournament has been run by the Jesters successfully ever since. Speaking of the Jesters, I was among a group that decided to inject new life in an organization that had lost the sight of its mandate to foster the game of squash among junior players. Initially under the direction of Barry Grant, Jesters Ontario chair at the time, and then others like Cass Quinn, Michael Hobart, who's here today, John LaHoop as well, Bert Keane, the Jesters Club is now a mainstay in the squash community and organizes and supports all kinds of junior tournaments for boys and girls in both singles and doubles. One time when we were looking for ways for the Jesters to engage in the squash community, I called Sherry and asked if she had any suggestions. And she did. Why not help out the struggling University Squash League, she said. So the Jesters put up $500, as I recall, but more importantly, manpower. That league is now thriving, and the Jesters have been a big part of its success, largely thanks to the efforts of Jester Alex Carter and others like him. A couple of highlights I'd like to mention include the effort that John Boynton, David Hetherington, and I led to bring women into the Jesters Club. Over initial objections by many, some of the more traditionalist, hidebound members, some of who actually resigned, we finally were able to arrange for the election of female members to the Jesters, and two of them are here tonight, naming Ann Smith and Susan Swift. And that happened, I think, in 2007. And that was a great movement in the almost a sea shift in what happened in the Jesters Club. The other thing that happened, I was working with Susan Swift again, and the boards of Squash Ontario and Squash Canada to sanction the first Ontario and Canadian mixed doubles championships, which have grown over the years to be a major fixture on the squash calendar, both of them. And a couple of years ago, to commemorate the great doubles player Jay Gillespie, who himself was a multiple winner of the Canadian mixed doubles tourney, Lolly Gillen, who I think is here tonight as well, and I donated a trophy in Jay's memory that is now played for annually. The last thing I would like to mention is my 25 years of coaching at Upper Canada College. I don't think I've gotten more pleasure out of anything that I have done in squash than to see young players develop skills and abilities from my coaching them. I'm very proud that the UCC varsity team this year won its fifth consecutive, not the fourth, Peter, the fifth, Canadian Independent Schools Athletic Championship. Although, as Scotty Bowman once said, when asked how he became such a good coach, he said, good players. And I have two of them here. Nikhil and his brother, Neil Ishmael, are sitting over there. They were stalwarts of the team for 5 years. So it's been a great ride over many years, and who knows where it will take me in the future. I do think I have contributed something of value to the game of squash in a career for which I am most thankful. Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure for me to introduce our second inductee from the class of 2019, Mr. Vincent "Vinny" Taylor. Vinny was treasurer and junior squash chair for Ontario Squash, now Squash Ontario, in the mid-60s and early 70s. At the same time, he served on the CSRA board, now Squash Canada, with responsibility for junior squash, and worked with Jim Bentley in the development of the Cricket Club's Fabulous Four. I speak of Craig Benson, Bill McDonnell, Gord Anderson, and Clive Caldwell. In the early 2000s, Vincent served on Squash Ontario's Masters Committee and was chair for a number of years. He was elected a jester in 1968 and was a member of the Canadian Jesters Tour of South Africa in 2011. Vinny played in the Lapman Grant Canada versus US matches on 4 different occasions. Vinny was always a fine player, but his squash career blossomed when he attained the ripe ages of 60 to 75 and now 80. In Ontario, Vincent has won 4 Open and 5 closed Masters titles, and last year was the 80-plus champion. Playing in the Atlanta Grand Masters over 6 years, Vinny was champion 3 times and finalist twice. Vincent represented Scotland on both their 5-man 70-plus team, that's age, and their 3-man 75-plus team, competing with England, Ireland, and Wales, serving as captain in 2014-2015. In the 2009-2010 season, Vinny won 4, count them, 4 national 70-plus championships. Oceania, New Zealand 1, USA 2, Canada 3, and Scotland 4. If that isn't in the Guinness Book of Records, it should be. Vincent received the Special Achievement Award from Squash Ontario in 2015 and the SILAP Special Achievement Award from the province in 2009. Please welcome a great international player that has given so much to the game, the ever-ready bunny, Mr. Vinnie Taylor.
Well, I don't believe a word he said, but that's all right. First of all, it's just remarkable that I would be considered for this honor, and I really do appreciate it, and thank you very much, but I would really suggest that you need a new board. I put down a few remarks here and call it under coincidences and luck. First of all, luck. I was born. That was the most lucky thing that ever happened, you see. And the second, that I lived. And that I had parents who were very helpful in that they didn't push me to do things, but they allowed me to do things, and they supported me when things that I wanted to do. I was also very lucky in having an older brother, Martin, who luckily was older than me, otherwise he wouldn't have been an older brother. But in so doing, the older brothers, the older siblings, are the ones who sort of create the bow waves. They're the ones who do things first, and you follow behind. And if you're lucky, you can work very well with that. And with Martin, it was always like that. He was always a supporter of me, and he helped me in almost all the things that I ever did. And I'm so grateful to him for that. See, Martin was mad keen on cricket, and that from a very early age, and things that Martin did, I never had an independent thought in my life, but I just followed what he did, and so I liked cricket, and we continued that way. See, then we moved to Scotland. This was during the war. We were in England, and then we moved to Scotland at the end of the war, and I discovered golf. See, no squash yet. I discovered golf. So we emigrated to Canada in August '51, and here's where the first luck and coincidence occurred, is that just as we arrived, in the newspapers, they talked about the fact that the MCC were playing cricket against Canada at a place called the Toronto Cricket Club, which we'd never heard of. So we went to find this, and we discovered that cricket was played, there was junior cricket, and we joined the club. Then what happens? The club then amalgamates with the Toronto Skating Club and the Toronto Curling Club, and lo and behold, squash courts get put in. And at this time, I'd gone to university, I'd heard about squash by one of the cricketers, and I would go to the squash courts at Hart House and learn who the good players were, and I would just watch those players. And the coach there, Ralph Rimmer, took an interest in me and took me, I remember, to watch into the university matches, and there was this fellow by the name of Jim Coons playing David Pemberton Smith, and that was the first major match, I should say, that I ever watched, and it was fascinating to watch that sort of thing. It was the old hardball days, you see. That was one of the big things and coincidences that changed my life in some ways. I became a court rat. Because the courts were new at the cricket club, I became a court rat there, and played as much as I could, and I learned as much as I could, and gradually came up the ranks. I was a very good C player, you see. I'd go into everything. I'd play one round and then watch people play. Then I'd play one round and I'd watch people play. I mean, I went to Quebec City and I even played Tim Kenwood there, and I was very happy to come back with a victory there, which made me a B player, you see, and eventually then became an A. But what I was most happy about is that at the cricket club, we had an enlightened management, and we had a wonderful professional in the name of Jim Bentley. And Jim Bentley and juniors were synonymous, you see, and I was fortunate enough to be able to be involved with Jim, and we created a number of, I shouldn't say we created, but because they were there, but they had a number of the wonderful juniors like Gordy Anderson and Craig Benson and Clive Caldwell, who's being inducted tonight, and Billy McDonnell. And they became known as the Bentley Boys all through North America as they progressed, and Craig became the first Canadian ever to win the U.S. Junior Nationals titles, and it was just a wonderful thing. But I should say that how did this happen? How did we ever go to the U.S.? It was because Jim Mason said that we should do so. I mean, we had our juniors here, and we'd go to the local tournaments, but we had no idea how good they were, the boys were, compared with the U.S. And the U.S., it was the pinnacle. And Jim said, "You've got to go." And we went, and we discovered not only were we competing, but we were better in most of the cases than they were there. And we dominated for a number of years, and it was Jim Bentley and the first group of the boys that came through, including Clive, and you'll hear Clive tonight, that created this. And that was the primary thing with me. Now, when we come to other coincidences with me, is that I had to end up having to go to Ottawa. And I'd given up squash by this time because I didn't ever think I could play softball squash, because I'd actually watched an exhibition between Jonah Barrington and Ken Binns. And as far as I was concerned, that was like watching paint dry, and I didn't think that this was a very good idea. I was never a good painter anyway, so as far as I was concerned, I was in double squash. The hardball game had changed. It wasn't the game I knew, and we didn't play it anymore. Ottawa had no squash, as far as I was concerned. No hardball, no double squash, so I didn't play. One day I noticed in the newspapers there was an article that said a fellow by the name of Tony Clark, who had been my captain of cricket at the cricket club, had won a Masters tournament in Ottawa, and I didn't think he was much good. So I thought, heck, if he can play it, I can play it. So I tried to go, and naturally I didn't read the paper correctly, and I went to the wrong club to join, and I tried to get lessons in this softball game. Turned out that the pro didn't want me, but put me on to the assistant pro, who was away at the time playing on the pro tour, and that was Heather Wallace. And Heather Wallace is then doing a wonderful job trying to get me to learn how to play for the last 30 years. She hasn't succeeded, yes, otherwise I won't be taking any more lessons with her, but she's still doing it. Anyway, I've had a wonderful time. I've done a little bit for the game, I think, and that's all I need to say. It's been a great past. Thank you very much.
Our last inductee from the class of 2019 is Mr. Clive Caldwell. Clive began playing squash at the age of 11 at the cricket club. He attended Ridley College in St. Catharines for 3 years and was the #1 squash player on the Ridley team. In 1969, Clive won the Canadian Junior Squash Championship. Over a 20-year career in the WPSA, he captured 35 singles and doubles titles, including the hardball singles in 1980 and 82, and the doubles in 1981 with the late, great Mohol Budokan as his partner. Clive started his career in the health fitness club business in '73 at the age of 21 as a squash professional at the Cambridge Club, and was invited to be a partner 3 years later. In 1984, Clive left the Cambridge Club when he purchased the Adelaide Club. Clive and the late Jack Lawrence then purchased the Cambridge Club that was in financial difficulties in 1991. In 1998, the Cambridge group of companies purchased a 50% interest in the Montreal Amateur Athletic Association Club, a Montreal institution dating back to 1881. 10 years later, Clive sold his interests, but not before growing the membership from 300 to 3,000. 1999 saw Clive purchase the three Fitness Institute clubs, selling Victoria Park in Mississauga in 2005, and changing the name of the club in the TD Centre to the Toronto Athletic Club. On the association side, Clive was very involved with the merger of the WPSA Hardball Tour with the ISPA Softball Tour, creating the PSA. Clive served as CPSA president for 3 years and WPSA president for 4 years. Urban Squash Toronto was co-founded in 2011 by Clive, now chairman, supporting underserved youth in the Jane Finch Quarter with respect to squash and education. This is the only program in Canada, but is one of 25 in North America. Urban Squash Toronto has 90 students and 8 first-year graduates in 2018. In 2012, Clive completed the famous Camino de Santiago walk, 920 kilometers in Spain, raising $115,000 for Urban Squash. Finally, in 2017, Clive, at the age of 65, and his father Brian, at the age of 95, completed in the Century Doubles Tournament in New York. Tournament chairman, who's with us here tonight, Kip Tatum, feels there will never, ever be a combined age. This age of 160 years will never be broken. Please welcome the Brow, Clive Caldwell.
Peter, firstly, thank you very much for such a lovely introduction, although you've stolen most of what I was going to say tonight, but I've got a little bit more. I'd also like to thank Chairman Ann Smith and the board of the Ontario Squash Hall of Fame. It was very nice of you to honor me in this way. I really appreciate it. I want to also pay tribute to both Peter and Vinny for also joining all of us, the Ontario board and Hall of Fame. It's really a great honor, and I've known both of them all of my life, and I'm going to speak about Vincent in a moment as well. And I also want to thank Peter Bennett, who was a Ridley graduate. Some of you may have seen the pictures that we had over there. He's a fellow Ridleyan, and he was the one who nominated me for this, so thank you to you, Peter. All of us in this room basically are lovers of this remarkable game that we have either played or watched our friends and associates play. And I too share this great love of the game. But my love of this game is not just as a participant, as it is for most of you, but not all. But truly, this is also how I have earned my living and the people that I've met. And I've decided, even though Mr. Hall has told me that I've got about 3 minutes to speak, I'm going to basically give you my life story in about 10 minutes. And I'm going to talk about how I've learned about this game, how I learned to play the game, my success as an amateur, which was a very short period of time, my role as a club squash professional, how important that was in my life. I was a playing professional for almost 15 years. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. I became president, as Peter said, of both the Canadian and the World Professional Squash Associations, which became a very important part of my life. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then finally, Urban Squash Toronto, which has become such an important part. I cannot tell you how grateful I was. We have 8 students in Urban Squash that are here tonight. I thank you so much for coming out. And I would really encourage all of you to introduce yourselves to these young students. They're really quite remarkable, and I think this program has meant a lot to them, and it has really meant a lot to me. So I'm going to tell you my background. I'm going to try to do it before Peter comes up and gives me the hook. And I'm going to start by telling you a little bit that my background and the game of squash has changed quite dramatically in the last 40 or 50 years in Canada. And I started playing at age 11, and I played hardball. There was nothing but hardball. And in fact, I did not even play a game on the wide court until I was 23 years old. And in fact, it was the very first wide court that was built in this country at the Toronto Squash Club on Lombard Street, which no longer exists. So although I played all of these games, and I think I played it at a relatively high level, my expertise was really the hardball game. As Peter said, I started playing at 11 years old at the cricket club. And there were two courts at the time, two American courts. You had to get to them from the skating rink at the time. And it was my father, Brian Caldwell, that started me. I used to get a penny for every point that I got over 3 from the old man, cheap bastard. And, sorry. And I must say that I'm sorry that he's not here tonight. My father is now 97, and back in November, he was still playing squash and tennis doubles 3 times a week at 97. He discovered that he wasn't feeling well, had a heart attack, and it's been a struggle for the last 5 months. My sister Lindsay is here from Vancouver Island, who's been here to help him a little bit, and it's so nice that this has worked out that she could be here for this evening as well. I also wanted to pay tribute, and again, I thought Peter was a bit rude to take this from me, but the Century 100 was really a great tribute, a great thrill for my father and I, and Kit Tatum is really the founder of that. It's a real treat that he's here tonight. I think his mother is here, Kit. I don't know if he's Canadian or American. I'm not sure what the hell he is, but Kit, I can't thank you enough for being here and for all of your friendship over the years. The cricket club is a big element, and Vincent was talking about it a little bit. One of the big things that they did, and again, it was critical to my involvement with this game, they really felt that juniors was really important. And they put aside Saturday mornings at a family club in the suburbs for squash for juniors. That's what we were allowed to play on those courts. Pretty rare, you know, Saturday mornings, that's when everybody wants to play squash, and yet they just felt this was such an important part of what they did, and I started playing in those Saturday morning house leagues when I was 11 years old. That is when I met Jim Bentley. I'm going to speak a number of times about Jimmy, but he taught me the game of squash. He helped me and hired me to become my first job as a professional. He helped me with business, and he really was a father figure to me for many, many years. And for those of you who know Jimmy, he died, his 4th anniversary of his death was yesterday. And he was a critical part of my becoming involved in this game. The second one was what you've heard about Vincent Taylor, my fellow inductee. He was such an important part of helping us around the country. We were traveling all the time, these Bentley bombers, as he described them. The first event I ever remember leaving the club to do was at the Toronto Racket. Many of you are Toronto Racket Club members. We went in, I think it was Christmas event when I was 13. And then when I was 13 or 14, we went to the first U.S. Junior, and you heard all those names. Gordon Anderson, who was here, Billy McDonnell, myself, Craig Benson, who won, I thought was going to be here tonight, but won the first Canadian to win the U.S. Junior, and a gentleman named Bob Sampson, who we haven't seen in decades. But the 5 of us learned the game under Jimmy, excelled at the game, and traveled a long time. And then in 1969, I became the Canadian Junior Squash Champion, which was a major event in my life at that stage. But I was also a very poor student, and I didn't really like school, and I figured out pretty early that my father made the same amount of money that Jim Bentley made, and I thought, I could do that. I could see a future that that's where I was going to end up. I end up being, after failing grade 10 at Lawrence Park Collegiate, my father felt maybe the right place for you as a you know, really a penitentiary at Ridley College, which is really what it was. And I cannot thank Greg Thompson and Tim Griffin who have come tonight. I must tell you, though, particularly with those of you who know Tim, he has really been a thorn in my side for almost my entire lifetime. The only really good thing that I did to really stick it to Tim was that he was supposed to become the #1 player when I first got to Ridley, but not when I got there, and he was second from then on. But he's been hurting me ever since. He's a member of our clubs. I have to serve him all the time. I have to be nice to him. He lived across the street. And the worst thing is that my son, my eldest son, Dylan, he's a bit of a gambler. And the worst thing about being a gambler, he also thinks that really gambling is like investing. You know, it's just a good way to earn money. But Tim is always taking advantage of him, trying to bankrupt the poor child. And it's been a very, very difficult time with Tim over all of these years, but a great friendship.
Time's changing, too.
Time's changing, my son says. So I then win the 2 Cricket Club A championships at 17 and 18, and when I win the second one, Jim Bentley, who's the pro at the Cricket Club, takes me aside at the bar to say, I just want you to know that I am going to be leaving the Cricket Club shortly, and I am going to start a new club in downtown Toronto, and I would like you to be the head professional. The problem is you have to be quiet about it. I don't want anybody to know. I'm not #1. I haven't even resigned. So I went along and was deathly quiet for literally 2 years that I was going to take on this role. The club, as you all know, and has been there since 1973, was put into what was at the time the Four Seasons Sheraton. And again, connections in squash and in life. Jimmy got to know Izzy Sharp, the founder and really one of Canada's great businessmen. And the original Sheraton Centre was called the Four Seasons Sheraton. And Izzy Sharp made that space available to Jimmy, and that is how it ended up in the Sheraton Centre today. The club opened up in 1973. It was an immediate success. I was the head professional. I was teaching a dozen lessons a day for 5 years. I was training as an athlete. I was running the pro shop, and I was fully ensconced as the head professional of that club. Something really significant happened to me, though, in the next couple of years, and there were 4 men who owned the Cambridge Club, and all owned 25% of it. And I was given the opportunity, one of them decided to leave, and I was given the opportunity, don't watch that clock for too long, Peter, I swear to you, I'll be out of here fairly soon. I'm almost halfway through. I'm almost halfway through. And I was offered to buy 5% of the Cambridge Club. It was an absolutely critical moment. It really came to the fore about a decade later, but I was no longer just an employee. I still was working for the club, but I had an interest in the ownership of the club, and it made all the difference. And really, it was Jim Bentley that made that happen for me. I'm 23 years old. They didn't have to do that, but it was offered to me and became very, very important in my life. Another personal part that I just want to speak of, I married in 1974, a year after that, and I married the late Marianne Caldwell. Many of you may remember her. And I met her, she was here from Rochester. I met her as she was working part-time at the Toronto Squash Club on weekends. Again, the role that squash played in my life. I started to realize that when you're making, I think I was making $20,000 a year at the time, how in the heck am I going to retire? How am I going to ever have any money if I'm saving $1,000 a year? This isn't going to work. And I figured out and talked to some people. I ended up buying a piece of incredible property at Roxborough and Yonge for $106,000. And it was a rental property. My wife and I lived in the basement. We rented 5 rooms. And really, it allowed us to pay the mortgage. And I was able to be a homeowner, even though I was making only $20,000 a year. 3 years later, a member of the Cambridge Club, still alive, member of the BNR, Howie Rover, came to me and said, my mother has just died and she's got a triplex in North Rosedale and you should buy it. So how am I going to raise the money? Well, like real estate is doing today and it was doing then, it was screaming ahead. And so I was able to remortgage that first property, take $35,000 out of it and use that as a down payment to buy the house. And I felt at that point that really my retirement was set. If I can just pay these things off in the next 25 or 30 years, I'm going to be in pretty good shape. And that was really quite true. Those two houses today would be worth $6 or $7 million. It's not how it turned out, but what I did there were critically important to the next steps. And we then started a family, and my 3 children and their partners are here tonight. My eldest son, Dylan, at 40, next Devin at 39, and my daughter, who lives in New York, at 36, will be 37 in a couple of weeks, have joined me tonight, and I thank you so much for being part of this. And again, just to the element of squash and how this has affected my family, before Mary Ann died, she became the president of the cricket club. And for probably 15 years, they have been running every other year the Mary Ann Caldwell Doubles Championship. So it has been such an important part of our lives and the sport itself. Then my playing career, and I played for 15, almost 20 years, singles and doubles, hardball. I won 35 events, as Peter said, in both singles and doubles. I won 2 world hardball double singles and 1 world doubles with Mo Khan, the great legendary Mo Khan, as well as 3 Boston Opens, which were really majors at that time. One of the most important groups in my life in the sport, and I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. The first really that I speak of all the time are the Khans. And Sharif is here tonight with his wife Karen, was inducted into this hall many years ago. But his father, his late father, Hashim, was a critical part of it. Mo, his cousin, his brother Aziz and Charlie, and they are a really remarkable family, and it's really been my great honor to have been friends with them and known them all for many, many, many years. In these events, I played all over the place, but close events, and I'm gone 30 or 35 events a year. I'm playing Fridays to Sundays, but I'm going with my family to Detroit and Rochester and Toledo and Montreal. We're driving. And one of the special things was every year, at least once or twice a year, I would fly with my children, one at a time, to different events. And there are some horror stories from those trips, but I think they're all remembered rather fondly. It was a very special part of our lives. I then became the president of the Canadian Professional and then the World Professional Squash Associations, and they were really important parts of my life, and I feel in many ways I did more in that area in business than any other parts of my life. I'm a great believer in creative swiping and stealing things. And I started to study the Tennis Association, the ATP, the racquetball, golf, and the PGA Tour. How am I doing, Pete? 5 minutes? Too long, eh? I'll do quick for you. The WPSA in the 80s really ended up being a major event. We ended up doing major events at the Convention Center, the Sheraton Center, and we ended up with about $1 million in revenue when we were finished. I then got involved in the club business. This group grew some things, and I ended up being able to take over the Adelaide Club. But why I told you the story about my homes, I had to sell all of that real estate to take the opportunity to buy the Adelaide Club. And the reason I did it, I felt it was probably the best located club in the country, and that was 1980, 81. And in 2019, I think it still is in First Canadian Place. We have done a lot of changing of courts in these clubs, and the Adelaide Club was originally a racquetball club, then 10 squash courts. We now have only 3, but it's a very important part of the program. We bought the Cambridge Club in 1991, and that has been full ever since. And then we bought the MAA in Montreal and the Fitness Institute. It's also been a very important part of supporting Canadian professional squash, and we have promoted and helped Jonathan Power, Graham Riding, Shahir Razik, and many others of Canadian squash, and it's been a very important part of what we've done. It would be wrong for me not to mention my wife, Lorna Caldwell, who has also been, I have met through clubs. We married 12 years ago. We've worked together for 30 years. She's been a huge supporter and life partner. She has been an outstanding general manager and CEO of both the Adelaide and the Toronto Athletic. She's also a great golfer, which is very difficult, and has been a huge supporter of my family and all that we have done. Almost, Pete. Last half page. Urban squash has been an absolutely critical part of my life, and we have been involved now for 8 or 9 years. Really, the founder of urban squash was Adrian Griffin. And Adrian is here tonight with his father, and he came to me and asked me if I would chair it. And I said that I would. And then he bailed about a year later, and there we go. Then his father came and started beating me up and said, you should really give some money to this thing. So he squeezed some money out of me. And we have been a major supporter of this program. We spend about $400,000 or $500,000 a year, and we have about 90 kids who are involved now. It's about $5,000 a child. And 3 of the critical components, Brent Adamson, Roy Mathuni, and Janice Fairclaw are here tonight. And they are the staff of the program, the educators, the organizers, the squash directors. And I really encourage you to introduce yourself to these individuals. It's an incredible program. I think it's exactly what we should all be doing in squash and helping the children that could use some help. And I'll tell you, 7 years into it, they are becoming terrific squash players. They've been mentored, and I think really enjoying this program. And I cannot thank you enough for your support. And Wednesday night, next Wednesday night at the Cambridge Club is our 4th gala at the Cambridge Club, and I would really encourage all of you to come down and join us Wednesday at the Cambridge Club. Finally, I just want to comment about the great people that I have met in this sport. You know, I've often been asked, because I'm 67, when am I going to retire? And I often say to them, I love the people that I work with, I love the people that I serve, and I love the people that I've met through this game. I met a president of the United States, spent 3 hours with George Bush, 41, not 43. Toured Pierre Trudeau through the MAA when we opened it. I have a wonderful group of friends who help with a board that we're sitting in, and 2 of them are here tonight. Michael Hazley, who's sitting over there, and the great Canadian legend and dear friend who I only found out was coming to this yesterday, the great Harry Rosen. And I thank you both for all of your support and help that you've given me over all these years. I also wanted to thank Darcy Wafers, who is here with her husband, Tom. She and I have been bonded since my wife's passing and has been a great help, and especially raising that $115,000 that we raised when I walked across Spain on the Camino de Santiago. I thank you all, and I thank you so much for this great honor to become a part of the Ontario Squash Hall of Fame. Many thanks.